All right, welcome to the Unit 8 quiz number 2 review. So we're just reviewing for that quiz that we have for Friday this week. My first hint, 3 questions on our quiz are from last week. 3 questions on the quiz are from last week. So make sure you understand how to do this stuff from assignment 1 and assignment 2, not just the problems from this week. Make sure you know how to do things like find the greatest common factor, find the factors of a trinomial, and factor by grouping. You still need to know how to do those. You can't forget them. All right. Moving on to this week, we were using that zero product property. And remember, the zero product property told us that if I have x times y equals 0, then I know that either x has to equal 0 or y has to equal 0, because something times 0 gives us 0. And technically, both x and y could be 0. So we just are using that zero product property so that I know that something times something, it's giving us a 0, then at least one of my terms has to be equal to 0. And so that's what we're using. Here's an example similar to one on the quiz that I'd like to have us do. So we've got the quantity x minus 2 times the quantity 2x plus 1 equals 0. So we've got that equation, and it just, in the directions would probably be just to solve the equation using the zero product property. So since I know this times this equals 0, then I know that either this has to equal 0 or this has to equal 0. So that's just what we would do. We would say, okay, x minus 2 equals 0, or 2x plus 1 equals 0. And then our job, what we're trying to do, is to find out what x is going to make it so that it equals 0, so that this works, so that this whole side is 0. So we're just going to solve for x. So this says minus 2, so I'm going to add 2 to both sides of my equal sign. So I get x equals 2. So one choice could be that x equals 2. When I have put a 2 in here, that makes this equal 0, so our whole equation is going to be true. Here's our other option, 2x plus 1 equals 0. So we're going to solve that one. Subtract 1 from both sides of the equal sign. Then I get 2x equals a negative 1. This means, let's see, to get x by itself, right now it's got 2 times x. So we've got to go ahead and divide both sides by 2, divide both sides by 2. That cancels or gives us a 1. So on this side, we've just got an x, and on that side, we've got a negative 1/2. Don't be afraid of fractions. They're valid answers. All right, so I've got x equals negative 1/2 and x equals 2. Now again, it's a multiple choice quiz tomorrow. So my answers might look like this, or it might just look like a list of numbers, or it might have those braces on there. All right. Ooh, that was terrible. Okay. So remember, you look for any of these types of answers. All right. So that's one problem. Let's see. Let's do another one. If we have 2x squared equals negative 6x. Now I don't even have a 0 in there. So how can I use the zero product property? Well, to use the zero product property, first we've got to get a 0. So let's get this negative 6x, move that term to the other side. So we have a 0 over here. So let's see, this is a negative 6x. To turn that into a 0, to make that a 0, I have to add 6x to both sides. So let's see, negative 6x plus 6x. Yep, I'm getting a 0 there. 2x squared plus 6x. I can't just add those together to get 8 because these aren't like terms. That's an x squared, that's just an x, or x to the 1. So since they're not like terms, they just sit there next to each other in the equation. Okay, so now I have something equal to 0, but I don't have anything that's being multiplied. This is where we use last week's skills, and we're going to factor something out of this binomial. Let's look at our coefficients. What's my greatest common factor of those coefficients? All right, a 2. I can factor a 2 out. Let's take a look at the x. What's our greatest common factor for those x's? Excuse me. Excuse me, I had to sneeze there. Okay, so we factored a 2 out of their coefficients, and then what can I factor out of each x? Let's see, each term has a 1x, so I can factor 1x out. What's left inside our binomial? Let's see, we've got an x in here and a 3. Let's see if I did that right. So I always just distribute back, multiply back, so I can see if I'm getting it right. So 2x times x Yep, so that gives us 2x squared. 2x times 3, yep, that gives us 6x. Okay, so now I know either this stuff has to equal 0 or this stuff, because they're being multiplied together. You can draw those around if you want it to make it look like more of the problems that we did on the worksheet. So either this term, this group has to equal 0, or this binomial has to equal 0. Okay, so we set those equal to 0. So I've got 2x equals 0, or x plus 3 equals 0. Let's see, divide both sides by 2, I get x equals 0. So you subtract 3 from both sides, and I get x equals -3. Okay, so I've got 0, -3. Your answer might be listed 0, -3. Okay, or the -3 would probably come first, -3, 0, either way. Okay, so that's how you do those problems. If it's not starting out with a 0, move your equation, change your equation, do some algebra so that you have a 0 on one side. Let's do one of those X problems. Sometimes they're called diamond problems, depending on who's making the worksheet, diamonds problems or X problems. And so if I've got an X here and a Y here, on our worksheet that we did in class, it would just be blanks, but I'm putting an X and a Y there just to use a little more algebra. So if you want to think of it like the ones we did on the worksheet, it's just those are blank, okay, and you've got to figure out what goes there. I'm putting X's and Y's in there, level up a little bit. All right, so you're going to ask yourself, what numbers can I put in for X and Y? They're going to make these numbers true. Remember, up here is our product and down here is our sum. So when I multiply these together, it's giving me -12. When I add them together, they're giving me a -1. I'm just going to write out my factors of -12 and find out what works. And since one of them's negative, I know one of my factors is going to be negative. The sign of this one tells me which one's going to be negative. My bigger one is going to match this sign. So let's see, 1 times -12, 2 times -6, 3 times -4. Okay, and I think that's all our factors. So let's see, 1 times -12 is -12, but they don't add together to give us 1. 2 times -6 is -12. When I add them together, it gives me a -4, not a -1. 3 times -4 is -12, and 3 plus -4 is a -1. That gives us that -1 we're looking for. So these are my factors. So my answer on my multiple guess test could look like x equals 3, y equals -4. But remember, like I talked about in the other video, these two terms are interchangeable. So you could also write that as x equals -4, y equals 3. So if I get this answer and then I'm looking at my multiple choice answers and it's not there, it could just be that when I wrote the answers, I wrote them differently than you did. Okay, so this is one of those rare cases where x and y actually are interchangeable. All right, I hope that helps. Good luck on your quiz. If you have any questions, feel free to email or text, and have a great day.